بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام أتمان الأكملان على خير خلق الأجمعين وعلى آله وأصحابه من سار السبيل ونهجه واستنى بسنة اليوم الدين. أما بعد, I want to say thank you to Brother Abdul Malik for giving me an opportunity to address you all today. And it appears in current times, being an elected official, I'm one of the few who are qualified to speak about justice. But as a conscious human who always aspires to be present and awake, I want to address, this communal body here that has gathered in the pursuit of those aforementioned two qualities, being present and awake. I want to start off though by thanking Sister Mugahid for, inculcating or associating Egypt with Africa, because one of the plots of the devilish people that we know that often rule and write legislation, they desire to separate us and use that as a means by which they can manipulate our consciousness and our deliberate actions. And so I don't have a prepared speech because, as Abdul Malik said, I have a very long litany of appearances I have to make today. But my father, Abdurrahim al-Mu'tasim, he always told me, he said, when you give a man an open mic and a captive audience, he's liable to say anything. He said, so speak to the heart from the heart. And as my doctor and one of my professors, he doesn't know it because I too troll YouTube, Dr. Akbar, I listened to him speak one time, and he was very adamant about the use of language and the words that he used in his speech. And so as I rode here today, I thought about the topic that was at hand, the pursuit of justice. And I questioned myself, as a human being and as a people, when have we ever pursued anything? If I was to wake up from my sleep, as we often do as men in 2018, and prepare breakfast for my wife, I wouldn't pursue breakfast for my wife, or else I'd be divorced, right? I have to actively prepare breakfast so that my wife can eat and get nourishment from those things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has provided for us. And so taking that into account, understanding that we can no longer just pursue justice, we have to be adequate, active participants in establishing justice. I just want to make a couple points. When I was younger, as Abdul Malik said, we used to listen to Malcolm X, and we used to get, enraged, and we used to get, agitated. We used to get fired up. We used to become anxious about some of his words that he used to leave, that he used to give to us, to the point where me and one of my cousins used to stand on the corner of Broad and Market in Newark and deliver a memorized speech of his, and we would take turns and we'd go back and forth. And so I remember one of the speeches that he gave that I enjoyed was the ballot or the bullet, in which he addressed and he spoke about the reality of the lack of representation. And he spoke about there's no taxation without representation. And so if we look around nowadays, we find people like myself of African descent here living in America who have been afforded an opportunity to acquire some life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But what I often begin to realize in my life, equal footing is not the same as an equitable footing. Because the reality is that things that affect people in Ocean County, in New Jersey, and in Franklin Lakes is not the same thing that affects the body of the populace within East Orange. And so when we begin to talk about elections and elected officials, I want everybody here to realize that we are in the midst of what necessitates servant leadership, meaning that I have been elected to office. And I have to make a sidebar note here. I'm not a politician. I'm not. I have to say that by way of proclamation and actions. I'm a public servant because, as my big brother Abdul-Malak, or my sheikh, mentioned earlier, I run into burning buildings for a living. And so the conscious, deliberate effort of putting your life on the line day after day, it brings you to a certain level of being awake. And it's necessary that you be present. And so if it's a matter of understanding what we have as a responsibility as a people, as we so-called, some of us, pursue justice, I employ the body of collective people that are here, that are present and awake to establish it. Because whether it was our good brother, our teacher, and may Allah put light in his grave, Malcolm X, giving such loquacious speeches, addressing social reform and civility, he did not pursue justice when he ascended the lectern and received a bullet. He was in an active movement and the deliberate momentum of establishing justice. And so when we come to these gatherings and we listen to the beautiful, verbose language of our leaders, we must understand the language behind the language and the things that they are addressing. Is that we have to not allow them to be the singular voices in this valley of destitute justice. We have to stand up. We have to be the ones that are the active participants. Because whether I'm in city council passing a resolution demanding that the president goes through a physical and mental evaluation to gauge his level of competency, right? Or my mother is in the classroom for 40 plus years educating the next generation of leaders. Or my son is sorrowful or sore because I'm making him read the biography of Malcolm X. We are actively in the actions and those things that are going to bring about justice. And so I was also listening as my wife came in. I have to apologize to her because before I got on the podium, she whispered in my ear, "Don't be so loud." But I can't help it, man. The youngest of 4 children, you know, sometimes you have to get your way. And I don't know how to be quiet anymore. I'm tired of being quiet. The times of being silent, the times of muffled and mollified speech is over. Because when a man stands in front of you and tells you that he hates your guts, you have 2 reactions. You can accept it and lay down, or you can do what we used to do, you know. We're not even gonna go there. Not today. And so when I was listening to Martin Luther King, that I've been to the mountaintop speech. And he said, I looked over and I saw the promised land. And he said, we as a people will get there. And in many instances, people will say, we have arrived. But we have to understand that our justice, our civility is not predicated on materialism. Because I live in a house, or I drive a certain car, or I'm in a certain club. 3 minutes, the judge had more time than that. Thank you, sister, I appreciate it. I'm just trying to bring a little light to the situation. I know I am the hors d'oeuvres before the main course, so I won't step outside of my position. I want to just share a quick story in 3 minutes. Real quick. I hope it's going to be quick. If it's not quick, give me another letter, sis. Right? I am, by the grace and mercy of Allah, an elected official in East Orange. I ran for the first time after being the vice president of the Board of Education, or as the mayor used to say, the vice president of a $250 million corporation. I ran against a gentleman who was living in a community for 50 years. And I won by the grace and mercy of Allah. In that same year, I was promoted to captain. And so one day I was driving up 280 racing to get to an appointment I had with one of the mayors. And I was in a Crown Victoria gray, looked like a police car. I had my captain's uniform hanging in the back window. And I had a city council shield sitting in the front windshield. And all of a sudden I see somebody jump on my tail. Whoop, whoop. I said, oh man, I know what this is. I pulled off to the first exit. I pulled over at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Tell you how we program. I put my car in park, I turned it off, I rolled down the window, and I turned on the inside light, and I put my hand on the steering wheel. I turned on the inside light in the middle of the day. I put my hands on the steering wheel. The guy came up, he knocked on my window, license and registration. I gave my license, I gave my registration, and I said, if it pleases the officer, I'm also a captain in the fire department of Newark. You know, some kind of brotherhood you would think would be aroused in this individual. He looked at it, he looked at the difference in name, right, and attribute. From my license, it says Mustafa Brent al-Mutazim. And on my ID, it just says Mustafa al-Mutazim. I held on to that to honor the sacrifice that my father made, and I wanted to be recognized throughout the annals of history that I was his son. And so as I gave him that documentation, he looked, he said, who? Your brother is the captain? I said, no, sir, if you look closely, that's my picture. And he looked, and he looked, and he looked, and he looked. And I said, if it pleases the officer, can I go into my glove compartment and get further documentation? I pulled out another badge. I had a badge from the city of East Orange that says this is a councilman. I said, if it pleases the officer, I'm also a councilman in that city right there. We were a block away from the city I was going to. He took it, he looked at it, and this is what he said. He said, they give you badges in your city? I said, yes, sir. He said, well, they don't even give you badges, give badges in my city. I said, well, sir, how big is your city? That made him angry. So he said the most dreaded words to every young African-American male. No. Sit tight. Any man has ever heard that word, sit tight. Put your, oh boy, here goes trouble. He goes back to his car, he starts to run my documentation, and he looks up something, and he calls somebody on the phone. And he comes back to the car, and he looks in the window, and he says, oh, sorry, brother, why didn't you just say that? I looked at him, I said, oh, we brothers now. We brothers. I said, I appreciate that, sir. And he begins to start a conversation. I took my documentation and I sped off. And so my message today, brothers and sisters, in essence, right, is that as a people, we cannot be delusioned by the buffoonery and tomfoolery of the selected President Trump, of those obsequious nature, of those or those who are obsequious in nature that support him verbally, by rote, or in silence. Because there is more devilry and inhumane actions and legislation afoot in the nation's capital. And so I ask everyone here, when have we ever pursued anything in the absence of sacrifice, in the absence of laying down our life, in the absence of our money, our sweat, and tears? And so I'm going to leave you with this. I'm not as poetic as the sister right there, but I was thinking about my father as I came. We must stop reaching for the low-hanging fruit of civility and grab the equitable fruit of justice as we climb the tree of freedom. Because as my father used to always say, all fruit is low-hanging when you climb the tree. Jazakallahu khairan, barakallahu feek.
ITV, Call of Peace.